Elena Glenn, a humble 64-year-old woman, faced an incredibly tragic situation when she lost her son. Not in an accident, but under circumstances that left her devastated. She was at home caring for her only granddaughter when members of Child Protective Services arrived and took the little girl away, claiming that Elena was not fit to care for her. During the subsequent court hearing, when the child was given the chance to speak, everyone in the courtroom was left speechless by the words that came out of her mouth. The Glenn family was far from ordinary. Elena, her husband, and their 4-year-old daughter lived in the small, remote town of Ishaz, nestled in the mountainous regions of Canada. The mountains were not just a backdrop to their lives. They were the very essence of their livelihood and passion. Both Elena and her husband worked as mountain guides, leading small groups of tourists on explorations through this almost untouched part of the country. Their specialty was guiding visitors on night trails in search of the breathtaking northern lights, offering people the chance to witness some of the most awe-inspiring, uncharted landscapes in the world. The sight of this celestial phenomenon often reduced adults to a state of childlike wonder. Some knelt in awe, gazing at the moving skies, while others expressed their gratitude through tears. For Elena and her husband, the ability to create these unique moments for their guests brought them immense pride, a reward that far outweighed any financial gain. However, like many professions that involve risk, their chosen career came with its own set of dangers. Every trail they led was fraught with potential hazards, from bear encounters to falls into icy crevasses, and the ever-present threat of avalanches. On a sunny afternoon with the temperature hovering around 4 degrees Celsius, Elena and her husband were guiding a group through the mountains when an inexperienced tourist suffered an accident. With a broken ankle, the tourist was unable to walk, forcing them to wait for help while the rest of the group descended the mountain with the assistance of another guide. In just 45 minutes, the calm weather on that icy peak turned menacing. The wind picked up, and the wind chill plummeted sharply. Though they didn't want to alarm the injured young man, it was clear to the couple that these worsening conditions could lead to a serious problem. Due to the intense gusts of wind, both air and ground rescue teams were unable to receive clearance to ascend the mountain until the weather stabilized. Meanwhile, in the town below, an unexpected snowstorm had already begun causing chaos, and within minutes, it reached the mountain, dragging everything in its path. Only 13 hours later, when the winds finally subsided, was a rescue helicopter able to reach the location where the 3 of them had been waiting. The team circled the area but saw no sign of life. 2 rescuers descended from the helicopter to search on foot, but they found no trace of the couple or the injured tourist, and their calls went unanswered. After 20 minutes of searching, the rescuers were about to return to the helicopter and continue their search elsewhere when one of them noticed a glove on the ground. Carefully, he picked it up, revealing an outstretched arm trapped beneath it. Unfortunately, the help had arrived too late. The couple's young daughter, named I, was just 4 years old at the time and had been with her nanny as usual while her parents were working. The police then sought out the child's grandmother, Elena Glenn, to deliver the heart-wrenching news. Elena, despite her age, was an active woman deeply connected to her family. She spoke with her son and granddaughter almost every day via video calls, as she rarely left home due to caring for her husband, Henry. Glenn, I's grandfather, was confined to a wheelchair due to a debilitating accident that had left him incapacitated. Elena was working at the travel agency when she received an unexpected visit from the local police chief. The moment she was informed of the tragic death of her son and daughter-in-law, Elena could not contain her grief. She broke down in tears right there, in front of her clients and her boss. Never before had she cried with such desperation and inconsolable sorrow. Though Elena had faced difficult moments in her life, such as the accident that had forever changed her husband's life, nothing compared to the unbearable pain of losing a child. During the funeral, Elena noticed that I, her young granddaughter, hadn't shed a tear or spoken a single word. How could anyone truly understand what was going through the mind of this little girl? What was the depth of her suffering? Or how much did she comprehend about the situation? "My love," I'm here for you. Grandma will take care of you forever, Elena whispered, trying to comfort her granddaughter with a gentle embrace. But no matter how hard Elena tried, she knew that I's life was about to change drastically. Elena's house was small, and I no longer had a room of her own. The grandmother also didn't have the same financial stability that I's late parents had provided. Consequently, Elena was forced to make difficult decisions, such as withdrawing I from her French classes and enrolling her in a different school. Elena was heartbroken, knowing this was not the right time for more upheaval in the young girl's life. However, Elena's salary from the travel agency barely covered the household expenses and her husband's medication. Despite the financial strain, the grandmother did her best to provide comfort and support to I. Every morning, Elena would wake up early to prepare breakfast for her granddaughter, and she even managed to find a few new toys at the Salvation Army Bazaar, which was held monthly in the town. Glenn did what he could, but his physical limitations prevented him from playing with I the way she liked, as her father used to. He could no longer run around the house with her in his arms, tossing her up and down, filling the air with laughter. Months passed since the little girl had moved into her grandmother's home, and a persistent worry gnawed at Elena's mind. Soon it would be a year since I had arrived, and the child hadn't spoken a single word. "You know, Amber, I'm really worried about this," Elena confided in her coworker. Amber suggested that I's silence might be a normal reaction for a 4-year-old coping with trauma. It could be her way of dealing with the shock. "Poor thing, right?" Amber said sympathetically. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She often felt guilty, fearing she was failing in her role as a caregiver. Elena's anxiety deepened when I's new schoolteacher called the grandparents' house urgently. Feeling uneasy, Elena tried to explain the situation to the teacher, but only managed to say that she would handle the matter. "Well, in any case, I'm calling to ask how she behaves at home. Does she communicate well with her parents? Is she active in play?" the teacher inquired. When Elena responded that I hadn't started speaking yet, the concern in the teacher's voice was palpable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Glenn, but this isn't normal at all. A child her age should already be speaking and forming coherent sentences. I strongly recommend that you take her to a doctor as soon as possible to ensure she receives the proper care," the teacher advised. Taking the advice to heart, Elena scheduled an appointment for that same week. The pediatrician was kind and gentle during the consultation, which helped put Elena at ease. However, when they spoke privately, the doctor's words confirmed her worst fears. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Glenn," the doctor said softly as I waited in the play area, "but her symptoms are very similar to those of a child suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Physically, she's perfectly healthy, but the tragedy that occurred with your son and daughter-in-law cannot be overlooked." The doctor emphasized that I could face long-term challenges if her condition wasn't closely monitored. Elena was deeply troubled by this diagnosis. She wanted desperately to help her granddaughter regain the ability to speak and become the sociable little girl she once was. The doctor recommended giving I plenty of attention, talking to her frequently, and encouraging her, even if she didn't respond. Over time, this could help her feel more comfortable and eventually start talking again. He also suggested regular consultations with a psychologist to provide ongoing support. Though there seemed to be a solution, Elena soon realized there were two things she was running out of: time and money. Providing I with the full attention she needed would consume the time Elena spent working, and the psychologist sessions would require money that could plunge the elderly couple into debt. The weight of these challenges bore heavily on Elena as she grappled with how to care for her beloved granddaughter while keeping their household afloat. That afternoon, Elena sat down with her husband to discuss the overwhelming situation they were facing. She was clear. She had no idea how to resolve it. Henry, her devoted partner, reassured her, saying, "We'll find a way. If necessary, I'll find a job. I know it might be difficult for someone to hire an old man in a wheelchair, but I'll give it my best shot. Our granddaughter needs us, Elena, and we've been through so much already. This won't bring us down." He held her hand firmly, his voice filled with determination. Elena found comfort in Henry's resolve, But in reality, their challenges only grew more difficult. The grandparents balanced between engaging their granddaughter in conversation and giving her space, encouraging her in every way they could. They did everything possible to ensure she felt not just comfortable, but loved and secure once again. Although their love for the little girl was boundless, the task of carrying the conversation themselves was exhausting. Yet, small breakthroughs began to emerge. It was evident that I was trying to express herself, and Elena and Henry were willing to sacrifice everything for her. They began to notice traces of less timid smiles on I's face, especially when Elena was in the kitchen, preparing meals and sharing stories from her youth. Elena was genuinely dedicated to her granddaughter, so much so that she didn't realize what was about to unfold in her own life. One Friday, the owner of the travel agency called Elena into her office and delivered the news directly. She was being laid off. Elena's face was a picture of mute shock. She knew she had spent less time at work in recent months, often leaving early when business was slow and arriving late on less busy days. Nevertheless, everyone at the agency was aware that she had a child at home and, she believed, understood the effort it took to care for her granddaughter's mental health. "This is a business, Elena," the newly appointed young director of the agency stated coldly. "Without results, the business fails. It's as simple as that." Elena was stunned. This was the worst possible time to lose her job. The director claimed that the elderly woman was no longer focused on her work as she used to be and was not producing the same results. Elena had worked at the agency for 12 years, practically since its inception, and she demanded a more honest and convincing explanation, knowing that her contributions didn't directly impact the agency's financial results. "Do I really have to spell it out? You're a relic here. You've been around since the company's early days, but you're not as efficient as you once were. You're outdated, and it seems like your mind is somewhere else. A friend from my university will be taking your place starting Monday. You're dismissed." With no alternatives, Elena set aside her dignity and begged to keep her job. Through tears, she explained that without her salary, she wouldn't be able to meet the needs of her husband and granddaughter. However, the only response she received was harsher words from her young boss. "That child isn't even yours. Put her up for adoption and let the universe take care of it," the heartless director said. After hearing such a cruel statement, Elena lifted her head and walked out of the office without looking back. She didn't want to spend another second near that terrible woman. Yet, she was left with no idea of how she would pay for her granddaughter's psychological treatment or her husband's essential medications. Nor did she know how to break the news to Henry. She had to find strength within herself to return home, but the walk back gave her time to think of a solution. As soon as she arrived home, Elena went out again, knocking on doors up and down her street and throughout her neighborhood, searching for work and handing out her phone number. She spoke about her experiences and offered her services as a cleaner, waitress, cook, and even as a caregiver. She was willing to do anything necessary to provide for her family. Unbeknownst to Elena, Henry was also trying to keep his promise. He reached out to all his contacts, looking for any available job opportunities. The grandfather was utterly committed to his granddaughter and refused to let all the progress they had made slip away. Despite his hopes, fate hadn't finished testing the limits of this family. Elena couldn't find any stable employment, but she began washing and ironing clothes for some of her neighbors. One day, as she was overwhelmed with work, the doorbell rang. Elena rushed to answer it and found a social worker from Child Protective Services standing there. He carried with him a complaint and a court order to take I away. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We've received a report from the school that you are not in a position to care for a child in your home. According to our investigation, the child is not socializing and she isn't speaking, which has made her a target of bullying at school. Furthermore, you are an elderly woman, unemployed, working informally while caring for an elderly man in a wheelchair. It seems only a matter of time before the child doesn't have enough food or clothing. We will continue our investigations, but for now, we're here to take the child to a suitable shelter as a preventive measure. You can appeal this decision in court, but in the meantime, she will be safe with us the agent explained. Elena felt a cold shiver run through her entire body, and she was paralyzed for a few seconds. She tried to physically block the officer from reaching out, but a second officer stepped in, preventing her from doing so. She showed no reaction, which only strengthened the accusation of neglect. The child protection agent took the little girl away, and the pleading look I gave her grandmother broke Elena's heart. The child didn't want to leave. Elena was left devastated, her world crumbling in an instant. When Henry awoke from his afternoon nap and learned what had happened, he was stunned. The two of them wept together, their shared sorrow deep and overwhelming. There were no words that could comfort Elena in that moment. All Henry could do was secure a public defender and fight to bring their granddaughter back. The following weeks were empty, colorless, and filled with a sense of hopelessness. It felt as though everything had suddenly collapsed, but Elena refused to give up. "I won't let them take my granddaughter," she resolved, staring at herself in the mirror as she prepared for the court hearing that would take place in 2 hours. "I know I'm not doing everything perfectly, but I was on the right path. She needs me just as much as I need her, and I'm going to prove that to anyone who will listen." At the hearing, Elena recounted her entire story to the judge, from the tragic death of her son in a mountain accident to her dismissal from the travel agency, and finally to the officers showing up at her door. Before making a decision, the judge called I to the stand and spoke to her gently. "Hello, my dear. Are you all right? Tell me, do they take good care of you at your grandmother and grandfather's house?" But silence was the only answer that filled the room. The little girl kept her gaze fixed on the judge, her expression serious and unreadable. The judge leaned forward, nodding thoughtfully, then asked another question. "Do you love your grandmother, this woman who is standing here in front of you?" Once again, I lowered her head and didn't respond. Finally, the judge said, "If you have anything positive to say about your grandmother, please say it now. Otherwise, remain silent." The room fell into a heavy stillness, and the child's continued silence convinced the judge to pronounce his sentence. In the end, it was decided that Elena was not fit to care for I, and that the child should remain in a shelter. "No, please don't do this to me. You don't understand. She needs me as much as I need her, please," Elena pleaded, her voice rising in desperate cries. The public defender who had accompanied her remained silent, offering little help beyond having arranged the hearing. 2 officers began to escort Elena out of the courtroom, trying to prevent the situation from escalating into a scene. Just when all hope seemed lost and the hearts in the room were shattered, a small, unexpected voice broke the tension, clear and resolute. "Don't take my grandmother away." Everyone froze, looking around in shock, unsure if they had truly heard what they thought they did. The entire courtroom was stunned as they realized the voice belonged to I, who had finally spoken up with unexpected conviction. "I want to stay with my grandmother. I love you, Grandma," she said once more, her voice gaining strength. The judge choked up and coughed to regain his composure, clearly moved by the child's words. Elena, with tears streaming down her face, broke free from the guards and ran to I, embracing her tightly and promising never to let her go. In that moment, Elena's resolve was stronger than ever. She knew they had to keep fighting, and she decided then and there that she would appeal the decision. The battle was far from over, but now there was a glimmer of hope. Despite having made his decision, the judge was compassionate enough to reconsider before making a terrible mistake and causing further pain to that family. In a surprising turn of events, he decided to return custody to Elena, acknowledging the deep bond between grandmother and granddaughter. The moment was bittersweet, filled with both relief and lingering fear, but it was a victory nonetheless. Elena, still grappling with the challenges she faced, didn't stop there. Encouraged by a casual conversation with a supportive friend, she decided to question her unfair dismissal from the travel agency. She was advised to not only sue the agency that had so callously fired her, but also to take legal action against her former boss, who had clearly violated labor laws and discriminated against her. Elena took this advice to heart, knowing that she had to fight for what was right, not just for herself but for her family. After months of legal battles, the elderly woman emerged victorious. The court ruled in her favor, and she was awarded a substantial settlement. With the compensation in hand, Elena was able to expand her small home, adding a special room just for her beloved granddaughter. It was a labor of love, a space where I could feel safe and cherished. As part of the legal agreement, Elena also began receiving the retirement benefits she had long been entitled to. This newfound financial stability allowed her to dedicate more time to her granddaughter, supporting her in every way possible. She encouraged I to talk more, to express her feelings and fears, gently guiding her through the healing process. Elena was determined to help her granddaughter overcome the traumas of the past. In Elena's care, I's future was bright, filled with moments of joy, love, and security. The dark days were behind them, and together they looked forward to a life where they could finally find peace. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like. The next video on the screen is likely to move you as well. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.